Shuts, we're good to go, sir.
Great, thank you. 1994 echoes through history as the only year the four bands carved on the grunge Mount Rushmore would gift albums to the masses. The 1990s fifth calendar flip-through contained original work released by Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. But this year also holds the reason why it would be impossible for these groups to ever duplicate the feat. In January, Alice in Chains set the tone with an intimate follow-up to their powerful Dirt, with a 7-track EP titled Jar of Flies. Soundgarden, armed with memorable songs such as Black Hole Sun and Spoon Man, released Super Unknown that March. In November, Pearl Jam debuted their powerful Vitalogy to continue their incredible run of albums. That same month, Nirvana's touching and raw Unplugged session was made available in album form after the initial concert was played in New York City a year prior. When the frontman and lead guitarist Kurt Cobain, bassist Chris Novoselic, and drummer Dave Grohl ventured to the Big Apple for Nirvana's MTV Unplugged performance in the fall of 1993, their most recent album, In Utero, had been in storage for the past 2 months. Controversy swirled around the record, which stemmed from the abrasive lyrics on Rape Me, the imagery displayed in the music video of Heart-Shaped Box, and an amped-up musical tenacity pumping through the album. But on November 18th, 1993, the Grunge Gods would be able to bare their sensitive sides in an intimate setting. Armed with acoustic guitars, well-placed microphones, a cello, flowers and candles fit for a funeral, a surprise musical guest, cigarettes, tea, an office chair, and a set list woven together from a potent combination of cover and original songs, Nirvana was set to create one of the defining cultural documents for the last decade of the 20th century. But the meaning and impact of Nirvana's MTV Unplugged in New York would drastically shift in between the concert performance and its album release. On April 8th, 1994, the lifeless body of Nirvana's emotive and fascinating lead singer was found in his Seattle, Washington home. The 27-year-old frontman took his life via a shotgun blast to the head 3 days prior. Now, over 30 years removed from that fateful day, Kurt Cobain's music still touches the hearts of millions of people who were not alive to experience Nirvana mania in real time. Cobain's last album with Nirvana was released posthumously on November 1st, 1994. While it would have been a haunting record without the connection to tragedy, as 5 songs explicitly mention death or dying, and his whimpers and wails throughout the record emote powerful feelings, the LP takes on an almost mythical significance, with the world having to say goodbye to Kurt Cobain all too soon. Hello, I am Chad Jones, and welcome to Don't Scratch the Vinyl, a music podcast where myself, and occasionally a guest, break down an iconic album in its entirety. This show both lays out the historical significance of the record and what music fans can take from the compilation today. I am recording this episode at Big Night Media's studio in Boston, Massachusetts. I don't really remember my life without Nirvana being a part of it. Growing up in the 2000s, I was infatuated with rock music early on, but had zero frame of reference for the musical, lyrical, or even cultural differences between bands. I recall having Nirvana's 4 massive tracks on my iPod: Smells Like Teen Spirit, Lithium, In Bloom, and Come As You Are. I did not really understand that they were a very different band from AC/DC or Guns N' Roses, just that I enjoyed their scintillating guitar riffs and pounding drums. In middle school, I started to grab more information on Nirvana's story and Kurt Cobain's legacy, thanks to programs like VH1's 100 Greatest Hard Rock Songs and the channel's 100 Most Shocking Moments in Rock and Roll. And as I continued to grind through adolescence and into high school, my interest only grew. And by the time I got to college, with Nirvana's greatest hit CD wedged into the side slit of my Ford Ranger, I was infatuated by the group and their departed lead singer. I started to develop a deep connection with their songs. To this day, I have to be in a certain mood to listen to All Apologies, and afterwards, I often need to take a little break from listening to music. Very few bands and songs conjure up such a visceral reaction inside my heart. And after spending a lot of time with their Unplugged record in preparation for this episode, I am again reminded just how much weight this album carries. I cannot speak to what it felt like to watch the MTV special while Kurt was still alive. I am sure it was emotional and heavy, with the spooky stage setting and his well-known struggles with substance abuse hovering over an already moving performance. but spending ample time with the music and the videos of that night only heightens the significance. It would have been an important record had Cobain lived long enough to hear programs like this sing its praises decades later. But with this performance serving as somewhat of his musical sayonara, this record lives on to forever remind the world that Nirvana was just as compelling in a stripped-down setting as they were in a raucous environment. Nirvana's Unplugged begins with a pull from their 1989 sub-pop record, which was an indie album titled Bleach. The song is about a girl. And before they get underway, Kurt even jokes, "This is off our first record. Most people don't own it." I think it's a great, rousing musical intro. Cobain has great vocal lift, especially early on. He's not worn out by the complexities of delving into an intimate, unplugged setting for the show yet. His voice is still very, very powerful. And there's a very, very interesting part connected to this song as well, as Dave Grohl, the drummer, was actually using a drum brush, not a traditional stick for this track. And it's very, very noteworthy that, if you know anything about Nirvana's music, Dave Grohl was a very ferocious drummer behind the stage, and he would be banging his drum set to the absolute nth degree. And so in an unplugged setting, he really needed to tone down his style. And Kurt and a couple other producers were a little bit worried about that. Would he be able to handle this? And right away, you can tell he's very reserved and giving the track exactly what it wants with some delicate taps. Kurt's vocals are awesome during this one as well, especially holding out the free parts were longer or shorter, depending on what the song calls for. And also we have a new addition to the Nirvana lineup with Pat Smear, who would eventually join Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, coming on to give Kurt some emotional and musical support from the stage. It was a lot to handle on his plate for this album, and you could tell that he was able to bring in some other people to really help out and make sure that he wasn't overly worked, as he was going to have to be the driving force for this record and this performance. And I think this song really does a good job of establishing the feeling for the night and also for the record entirely. Great pull off the first record for them, and it helps remind the people listening who maybe necessarily didn't know a lot about Nirvana before they blew up with Nevermind, that they were still grinding away and producing music before they became MTV stars. Second track off the Nirvana's Unplugged record is Come As You Are, which is by far the biggest hit they would play of the whole night. And the crowd understands this and gives a huge pop early on, was that melodic riff starts banging away. Now, Nirvana decided to handle this performance actually in a very interesting way compared to a lot of other Unplugged performances, is that they did not want to just run through their greatest hits compilation and call it a night. What they decided to do was make sure that they were putting really interesting and in-depth thoughts towards which songs that they would play and which ones would hit performance in a relaxed environment in the Unplugged with the candles and the flowers all the way around. They couldn't be banging through Smells Like Teen Spirit as easily as they could Come As You Are. So they decided to rock with a few of their more either relaxed and underappreciated tracks, and they would eventually bring on some people to do some covers as well. Come As You Are fits perfectly for this environment. You could tell again right away that Kurt's giving some great emotional delivery from the lyrics, and the lines hit even harder, I think, in an unplugged setting as they would on the record, especially the line of, "No, I don't have a gun." Knowing where Kurt Cobain's story would wind up, that lyric remains as poignant and as sad as anything in the Nirvana discography. And he sounds just really sincere, belting out those terrific, subtle cries throughout the record, and especially on this song. I also really enjoy the intimate solo that builds up perfectly into the vocal's final act. It's a very, very solid rendition of Come As You Are, and it makes sense that they were able to go through with this one for this record. Jumping to the third track on this album, the first of 6 non-Nirvana songs the group would perform that night, Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam. Before getting into it, Kurt explains that this was a song done by the Vaselines, but it was a song that was based off an old Christian tune, so they would be doing it how the Vaselines did it. Now, this is actually the first song to explicitly mention death or dying, as again, that theme would be woven throughout this record and also in the aftermath of the album coming out. This is also the first song to include Lori Goldstein, the cello player, and she really gives a spiritual key element to this song, as it's connected so much with Christianity and Jesus and God and death and dying, and that cello adds such an important depth layer to this record throughout, and especially this song. So also, Chris Novoselic, who's the longtime bass player of Nirvana, and he was a friend of Kurt before they blew up with their band. Unfortunately, this record doesn't always highlight just how important he was to capturing the sound of Nirvana's records. As there's so many other elements going on, he can kind of get lost with the multiple guitar layers, Kurt's vocals, the delivery, the other musical guests that would come on. So there's not always a great time for Kurt to really give way to Chris to kind of show exactly how important he was to this group. But on this track, it's very interesting that he actually grabs an accordion for this one, and Dave actually takes his acoustic bass. So this is a very unique song, and this is the only one that has an accordion on it, and it makes the song even more compelling, honestly. And I really enjoy how there's a subdued delivery, especially from Kurt at the start of the song, and then the track would pick up. As Nirvana is very much known for having a hard, soft dynamic in their songs, and they needed to figure out a way to incorporate that into an unplugged environment. So what they decided to do for a lot of their songs was have Kurt start off with just singing, just playing the guitar, and then the other musical layers would come in later on, mostly around the chorus. And this song, it really highlights that they were able to capture that same bringing it down, raising it up, bringing it down, raising it up energy, even during a group where they had to perform with acoustic instruments. And it's beautiful. There's some also great harmonies on this track from Kurt and Dave. They were just so connected through singing. I'll touch on more on that later on. And the lyrics that really belted out, that stuck with me this time around, was, "Don't expect me to cry for all the reasons you had to die." Just a very deep, powerful song. Now, going into the fourth track on Nirvana's Unplugged is one of their most famous ones done of the evening, an electrifying cover of David Bowie's "The Man Who Sold the World." Before getting into this one, Kurt jokes again, "I guarantee you I will screw this song up." Everybody gets back into position. Chris gets back to his stool with the bass guitar. Dave gets back behind the kit with his drumsticks, and they're ready to go. So there's a very, very cool reverb from Kurt's guitar right away, and it's one of the most iconic sounds of this entire album. And it really gives off the feeling of almost like a classical electric guitar. And the reason why it sounded like that was that Kurt was very gung-ho about going out there without having any different pedals or amplifiers. He was very committed to the fact that he still needed to have his guitar run through his instruments and his tools. And so that's why it gives the song almost like a old school acoustic rock song feel to it. And it gives it a really haunting ambiance right away. It's a very, very dark, yet still fascinating intro. And again, there's more talk about depth with this song going through the "oh no, not me" pauses that build up the chorus, and then it slides back down again. There's also, again, more mention of death in this song, as, again, that will always be connected to this record and this performance. This is one of the few times where you can really hear Chris's bass going effectively through the song, as, again, that's not always the main part of this Nirvana record, but for this one you can clearly hear where he's plucking along. I think also another interesting noteworthy part of this song is that Kurt has almost a malaise to his singing, which he almost sounds apathetic towards the story. He's not very excited about meeting the man who sold the world. It's more of, okay, what does that got to do with me? And I love the chemistry on the solo. Again, coming from a group that didn't have a lot of time to really prepare for acoustic renditions of non-Nirvana songs, they have great build and great chemistry throughout the entire song, especially towards the ending. And as they're winding down the song, Kurt mentions how that was a David Bowie song. And Bowie actually was pretty complimentary of this song in a couple different interviews. Quote, "I was simply blown away when I found out Kurt Cobain liked my work, and have always wanted to talk to him about his reasons for covering The Man Who Sold the World," Bowie said. "It was a good, straightforward rendition, and sounded somehow honest. Couldn't have said it better myself." So now, jumping to the first song that they would pull off their newest record, In Utero, Pennyroyal Tea. And again, getting back into this song, it wasn't quite working during the rehearsals. So they decided to have Kurt just do this solo with the guitar. And he jokes before, again, if it sounds bad, these people are just going to have to wait. And I think what really punches through on this track is how he's able to hold and elongate T and me, which adds some really important depth, I think, to this song. It's really just him out there in a very vulnerable setting, but he's still able to hold power. And you can hear the emotion in his voice. And if you ever decide to watch the videos, either in the YouTube form of watching the entire album fully, which you can do, or also going through it and listening and watching song by song through the music videos, you can see that there's almost anguish in his face when he's delivering this entire song. I'm So Tired, I Can't Sleep, in my opinion, is one of the best Nirvana songs in their discography, and definitely one of the best ones that he gives out in this record. There's also some very delicate whimpers and murmurs through the song at times, and when he gets to the portion where he goes into the warm milk and laxatives, he's basically at a whisper. Very delicate. And then he brings up the energy while staying still pretty reserved for this song. And then it ends with a mini solo before lighting up a cigarette, and then Kurt just looks like the coolest dude in the world. You're just reminded of how much charisma he had without even really trying. And then with everybody getting back into position, Dave said, "Oh, it sounded good." And Kurt, in a very deadpan tone, just tells him to shut up. Next up, another track off In Utero, titled Dumb. This song was perfectly set up for this record. And it's very close to the studio version with a few different wrinkles. I really like how during the part where Kurt's singing, "My Heart Is Broke," his voice actually cracks a little bit. And I think it gives some cool insight into showing that this record was recorded as a concert. There were very, very few edits done to this record after it was already recorded. And so you can pick up on some details that you would have never heard in a regular studio record. And that's one of them. And I really enjoy the cello. It adds some great depth, especially during the chorus. It really builds up. And then with Dave not having to do a ton behind the kit for this track, his subtle backing harmonies are just perfect with Kurt. Both voices combine to hit "I Think I'm Dumb" on a loop to end the song. Very, very effective. Almost getting to the point where you're thinking that that's the biggest part of the entire song, honestly, and the most noteworthy portion. Love it. And the song just does a great job of highlighting that element. I'll touch on more on that later on. So now, getting to one of the darkest songs in Nirvana's entire catalog, Polly. Now, this song was actually inspired by a true story of a girl who was kidnapped leaving a concert in 1987 and then was repeatedly tortured and sexually assaulted. So she eventually escaped, just like how the character does in this song. Kurt was inspired reading about the story in a newspaper article and decided to write a song about it in Nirvana's Nevermind stage. It was written actually before that. They were thinking about putting that on their Bleach record, but they decided to rock with it for Nevermind, and the rest is history. It was a very interesting decision that they decided to go with this song for an MTV special. I'll touch on more on that a little bit later on. What makes this song very, very deep and intense is how it's actually sung from the perspective of the criminal, which is just, it's very, very spooky, and it's unsettling, 100%. But the crowd picks up the catchy riff right away and claps in approval. And I think that was also highlighting that they were not afraid to show off this part of their group in the MTV setting. Not only were they excited for this song, they were excited that Nirvana was not going to be completely neutered by MTV's regulations. And so Polly says her back hurts. She's just as bored as me. She caught me off my guard. Amazes me the will of instinct. It's a very twisted story, yet it's delivered in such a delicate form from Kurt's voice. And again, Dave is supplying just a few gentle taps of support through the drum kit, but then he ends up helping out and makes the song that much more eerie with you're not expecting to hear those taps really, especially towards the end, and just a little bit of amazement that you're hooked into this one. And I think it's just as off-putting, honestly, as the original. A couple differences is that Polly was originally recorded for Nevermind with actually an acoustic guitar. So the differences that you hear with this one as opposed to the studio version is that Kurt is playing with a more pristine guitar. It's definitely more expensive. There's an interview actually where Butch Vig, who produced Nevermind, is talking about the few differences of showing almost the behind-the-curtain look of recording Nevermind. And he mentions how the guitar sounds very cheap on the studio rendition. So with this one, you can clearly tell that there's a little bit more pop behind the guitar, a little bit more power with the strings. And the other big element that's a difference here is that the cello. It makes a creepy song even more hallowing, and it's just beautiful. Now, jumping to another track off Nevermind, Nirvana's On a Plane. I think it's an underrated song also. This is probably the most just straightforward rocking acoustic track during the entire record, as Cobain really smoothly delivers the verses, and then the chorus he even builds up with even more power. And it's some of his more polished singing for the entire show. There's times when you can really hear the emotion and the strain in his voice. But for this one, he's more in a gentle pocket of driving through more of just a classic, almost an arena acoustic rock song. and it works perfectly, especially at this stage of the album when you're getting into more of the depressing songs kind of wedged in between this one. There's great lift, especially during the pre-chorus when Kurt belts out, "Love myself better than you. I know it's wrong, so what should I do?" And then it just slows down perfectly with, "What the hell am I trying to say?" And there's great fills from Dave and Chris and Pat right on their instruments to build right into the last portion of the song. There's still some gravel in Kurt's vocals for sure, but it doesn't strain at really any point as it would for other parts of this record. And I think, personally, if you're going to team up the 8 songs that Nirvana did both in studio and for this record, I think this is the strongest duo of any of the songs that you would pick from. I love both renditions very much. So now, slowing down to a more somber track off of Nevermind as well, Something in the Way. Now, this is a part of Nirvana lore for a few reasons. As it was already an acoustic song off Nevermind, with a little bit of cello with it, but obviously it'd be more highlighted in this environment. And this song is connected to actually a memorial connected to the bridge that the song was written about. As Kurt Cobain was born and he grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, and for a while there was a little bit of controversy in how the city would handle his very complicated legacy, but eventually they gave way and have a memorial park set up with multiple sites of his statues, and there's some great graffiti that's actually connected to the bridge literally where people are writing Nirvana lyrics, and it's very quite touching. It's almost like if you're a Nirvana fan, it's a pilgrimage to go then to watch and take in that entire park. So getting back to the song for this one, Dave is able to simply just supply a little bit of rhythm by tapping the drumsticks against actually his thigh. And before the intro, you could hear Kurt talking about how I just need a little bit of backing vocals for the rhythm, and then a little bit of taps just to find the rhythm for the song. And Dave was able to tap his thigh, and then Kurt was able to nod along with it, like, cool, that's the rhythm I needed. I don't need it to be very loud for this song. And then how he emphasizes the mms during the eerie chorus really helped drive home the unsettling environment. He also really slows down his performance where he's almost giving a talking delivery during the verses, and it just fits the environment so well for the Unplugged setting. And the cello, again, it's very, very noteworthy how you can hear the difference between how loud and prominent the cello is during their Unplugged setting versus the studio version, and I think it works. So now we get into a little bit of a break, actually, and Nirvana decides to bring on a musical guest. Now, in real time, people were thinking, like, oh, who's he going to bring on? Is Eddie Vedder going to join stage with Kurt Cobain, and they're going to be blasting through their incredible 90s catalogs? Are they going to bring on a huge star? Nope. They decided to bring on the Meat Puppets. So Kurt and Chris Kirkwood join, as Kurt actually gets to set down his guitar to just focus on the singing of their 3 songs they would perform. And this shows that Nirvana was very into highlighting bands that they felt that deserved a bigger spotlight than maybe they were getting from the music business. They used their platforms at times to often raise these profiles of these groups. And another example is how they would often shout out the Pixies in interviews, saying that they were inspired by or even ripped off the soft, loud dynamic that would help drive Nirvana's entire sound. So it's kind of a funny portion if you're ever watching this song on YouTube getting ready for it for the concert. They're getting ready, they're getting their instruments all tuned up, and someone yells out for them to play Free Bird. And they jokingly play a little bit of Sweet Home Alabama. So once everybody is set and ready to go, they start off with the Meat Puppets song Plateau. So Kurt's nodding his head along into the rhythm. And this one also shows off how he can have his vocal cords really push through the scratchy deliveries while also still laying in a smooth pocket for other parts. The verses, they're almost menacing, even threatening in a way, when he whispers, "Some say it was Greenland and some say Mexico." And when I first heard this song, I was like, what is going on? Why would someone be confused about something happening in Greenland and then Mexico? Like, what's this lore about? The more I listened to their songs with the Meat Puppets, the more I found myself digging into what these songs are really about. And it made a lot of sense, honestly, that Nirvana chose not only to work with the Meat Puppets, but the 3 songs that they decided to roll with for this concert made all the sense in the world for them. Very haunting. And I think that's one of the best vocals of the entire record. And also another example of what you would find during this record and not other ones performed professionally in an entire studio is that Kurt actually coughs a little bit right before the first chorus. And I think they showed just a little bit of details that you wouldn't necessarily find from other records, and I think that's even more endearing for this record. And you could tell that he's really pushing through the chorus when he belts out, "Who needs action when you got words?" It's really quite gripping. And then the quiet humming from Cobain during the ending instrumental rounds out the song perfectly. Jumping to another track with the Meat Puppets, "Oh Me." There's a very eerie opening riff to it, very unsettling, and the humming background honestly adds to that while still making it quite pleasing. And I like how Kurt is able to accentuate certain vowels almost to fit the song a little bit better. With "If I Had to Lose a Mile," it almost sounds like he's using like an O enunciation and not really an I. And then the backing vocals from the Meat Puppets really drive this performance as well. The "I can't see the end of me," having multiple voices give that different layer, adds to the drama that's just dripping through this track. This record also helps really show the entirety of how Kurt was able to find some melancholy parts of his voice to really drive in through the record. And there's probably no better example than when he's performing with the Meat Puppets. That type of struggling with pain is very clear during these stretches of songs. Jumping to the last one with the Meat Puppets is titled "Lake of Fire." And Kurt shouts out how these songs are on the Meat Puppets' second record, so he's giving them a little pub for an MTV audience. And then he starts to clap, set the rhythm, and then we're off and underway. And I think this song is actually a very good litmus test for if you would like a lot of Nirvana's songs, as Kurt's voice at certain points are really straining and really pushing through, almost to a screech. And if that type of singing turns you off, I think this would be a good example to show you why Nirvana may not be for you. But if you enjoy that, and then the dichotomy of how smooth and delicate his vocals can be at other times shows off his range and also how he's able to emote both types of feelings in his performances. And during the chorus, you can really tell his voice is pretty raspy. Again, at this point, he's also been singing for about 45 minutes, and he can tell that his voice is going through it, but he's still pushing through to deliver a song that I find very, very fascinating and very compelling. I think it just shows also how Nirvana didn't need to be perfect to articulate the message of the song. And again, more mention of dying with an awesome chorus of "Where do bad folks go when they die? They don't go to heaven where the angels fly." And then there's a beautiful musical outro, and then the Meat Puppets exit, and then Pat Smear and Lori Goldstein return for the last two songs on the record. Speaking of closing, "All Apologies," which was the last song off In Utero, is next up. Now, the lights actually changed for the recording of this one, which is very, very dramatic. And it's just so riveting hearing those intro guitar plucks. They needed to obviously change up, again, the soft, hard dynamic for this song, as the studio version is phenomenal with how they're able to get to such a very, very sensitive spot and then just erupt during the chorus. Now, how they decide to handle that for this rendition is that Kurt is just singing and just strumming along the guitar, and then it blasts into the intro, and then we go right away with the incredible layering of the cello, multiple guitars, and the drums. And Cobain just finds a great pocket, especially at the start where he's giving some low murmurs, and then he has high whines, again, showing his vocal range. And then we get into the just trance-like setting of repeating "all in all is all we are" over and over and over again. Kurt and Dave are just so in sync for this one. They're practically whispering by the end. It's very fascinating how the more you listen to it, the more you can tell that they're definitely lowering their octaves just a little bit more each time they're doing it. And then even the last one that they give out is actually an a cappella. It's just those two guys singing. And I've been hitting at it for a couple times during this recording is that Dave Grohl's backing harmonies for Nirvana were an incredibly important part of their sound, yet it can often get lost in the Nirvana mosh of the pounding drums, the thumping bass, the screechy vocals from Kurt, the scratchy guitars, and that this record was able to highlight just how not only perfect they were of giving the proper sound, but they were so in sync of when exactly to punch through and deliver the lyrics. And it was brilliant. Again, this would be the man who would be launching one of the most successful rock bands in a post-Nirvana world by being the frontman of the Foo Fighters. You know he has singing chops, and in this setting, he was able to highlight Kurt's vocals in a very powerful connection. Now, I actually came around to liking the song more and more. The first time I heard it, I liked the studio version so much that it was like, are they really going to be able to ever duplicate that for this setting? And also, I was bummed that this was included on the Greatest Hits CD, where I wanted to have the in utero version of that. But it's so powerful, especially I think the intro and how it winds through the entire record. It's very, very emotional. And they do a great job, honestly, of adding some different elements to make the song fit in a brilliant way during an acoustic concert. So now, before we get into the final track, there's a little bit of actually like a smoke break, and the group is deciding what song they want to perform last, and they're taking some requests. And some fan, it sounds like a girl fan, yells out for them to play the Nirvana song "Rape Me," and Kurt, quote, "I don't think MTV would let us play that." Now, I found it interesting that they were able to actually perform Polly, yet not Rape Me for this song. I understand how it's an MTV setting and the chorus is more abrasive, and obviously the title is even more out there and in your face about what the song is about. But Polly was written and inspired about an actual person, whereas Kurt's taking on the perspective of an imaginary victim for that song. And for singing the lyrics in the standpoint of the actual person that committed the crimes, I think is even more darker than the song that they weren't allowed to play. But having said that, I understand that the chorus is very intense and that they would honestly just be able to put that on the record and put that in the set list, and they probably just didn't want the word rape in anything related to this entire concert. But I just found it interesting that they were able to still play Polly while not performing Rape Me. Good for them for able to at least put their foot down and go with probably their most darkest song for the entire discography. So now we're going into the final track off the concert. Where Did You Sleep Last Night? There's a little bit of some joking in the air as Kurt mentions how this song was written by their favorite performer and that he was actually interested in possibly buying Lead Belly's guitar for $500,000. And he joked that he asked David Geffen if he would buy it for him, and I guess Geffen wouldn't pull the trigger for him. So there's a little bit of some jovialness. I think they could tell that they were going to be able to give one more performance and then their night would be through. But then the smile wipes away from Kurt's face. He gets very serious, and that compelling intro of just him, the guitar, and the microphone starts underway. His voice is very dramatic, and it's cutting through. It's very interesting also how he enunciates the ow during Miles. It fits the song a little bit better as there's more of an ow through during other parts, and he's really able to, I think, help it sync up a little bit better by enunciating Miles more of a mouse from here. And then you're listening to the song, you're watching the record, you're watching the recording, you're thinking like, okay, this is a very, very nice concert, very cool to see Nirvana in this setting. Cool, we're ready to go. And then the song and the delivery and the performance just kicks into overdrive with Kurt screaming out, my girl. And then right there, you can tell that you're completely fixated on what this guy was doing. And it's just crazy if you're watching or if you're listening to. It catches you every time. It really is jarring. At one point, there's a very cool sequence that actually MTV was able to capture during their recording, is that Kurt, as he was sitting in an office chair, had a little bit more flexibility than in a stool setting for most Unplugged shows, is that he rotates his head back away from the mic so you can tell that he goes a little bit off, away from the power, but still has enough drive to really make sure that he's going through the microphone. And it's a very cool effect that whether you're watching or listening to, you can pick up on. So if you're watching, it was I don't know how the MTV crew was able to capture this in real time, but they actually show the camera right underneath Kurt's chin, and then he kind of fades away out of frame. I don't know how they were able to capture that and knew what he was going to do, but it's one of the coolest shots during the entire Unplugged show. And then he is able to slow down a little bit for the cry, with the whining of the hole, as his screaming right before that is just so primal. It sounds like he's someone who's truly in pain, like an actor who gets into the state of mind to cry during a scene of thinking of something that actually happened in his real life. And then that famous deep breath. He's almost going in like an MLB pitcher, ready to give his last pitch of the game. He's going to empty the tank. And then he guts out night through, and his voice and face almost contort to the point where they're not even saying a word anymore. It's gutting through with almost like an R and an N. And then as soon as he goes through the last vowel, he throws his head away and the stool rotates where he's having his back face the main audience as he just emptied his entire tank for that last portion of the song. And again, that was nice that he was able to be in the office chair to help rotate it. I think it really made a difference when you're watching it and listening to it. You can just hear and see the emotion is just so palpable. And it's clear that the guys involved empty their tanks. A raucous cheer just erupts from the crowd that I think they knew in real time that they saw something special. And it's incredible and captivating, even decades later after this performance, to really just show who he was as a musician and as a celebrity. So before we get into the separate categories here, just a couple other noteworthy things. So there are 14 songs total on this record. 8 were Nirvana originals. 1 was off Bleach. 4 were off Nevermind, and then 3 were chosen off In Utero. Kurt did 1 of them solo. The 6 covers, again going through the Vaselines, David Bowie, the 3 songs with the Meat Puppets, and then Lead Belly wrapped things up. So now we're jumping into the categories here. Crank It Up to 11. This is inspired by that scene from Spinal Tap, where the best portion of the record that all you want to do is just crank up the knob as high as it can possibly go for you. Obviously, this is a definite winner here for me, is the portion of Where Did You Sleep Last Night that starts off with him belling out, My Girl. It's jaw-dropping, and it's iconic, and it's endearing for a reason. Other options that I thought of for this category were the What the Hell Am I Trying to Say portion of On a Plane. I love the choruses on Lake of Fire, the Oh No, Not Me segment of Man Who Sold the World, but to me, this was an obvious winner. When I was going through the categories, this one jumped out right away, that I should reward it. Going to reprogramming and reshuffling history. I'll start with reshuffling here. So reshuffling history is just where I decide how is the album laid out, and would I change up either the intro, the outro, or any other portions of the record as where they were laid out in rhythm. So honestly, love the intro. Love how they started off with About a Girl, to not only just highlight a great song on their discography, but to show who they were before they became MTV staples. Ending off with Where Did You Sleep Last Night? Perfect. Couldn't get better than that. The only thing I think I would have switched as far as the layout of the record would go, I would have switched up I'm on a Plane with Something in the Way. I think because you're going to get so many more deep emotional songs with the Meat Puppets coming right after Something in the Way, that it could have been a great little bit of extra energy lift to go into On a Plane before you kind of slow it down again with the Meat Puppets and then All Apologies. But that's honestly just a nitpick. It doesn't need to be changed up. I like the format of it. So reprogramming history, this is where I just shout out how these other songs have carried through time and which ones have become very popular in certain areas, and then which songs are a little bit more underrated, right? So one way I look at this is going off the YouTube hits of all the songs. And I find interesting that none of the songs on Nirvana's official YouTube page had less than 10 million views, and none were higher than 100 million views. They were all pretty much in relatively striking distance of each other on that platform. A couple big legacy notes from this album is that The Man Who Sold the World and the All Apologies rendition made the Nirvana Greatest Hits CD, which came out in 2002. Another big portion is Lake of Fire has become a pretty big radio song in alternative and even now classic rock radio. And this is also something I found noteworthy, is if you're going through Where Did You Sleep Last Night on YouTube, what you will find is a lot of reaction videos, either from professional vocal coaches, therapists, just people who are interested in hearing more about Nirvana's history. And they have some just jaw-dropping reactions, especially during the portions that I talked about of the ending. And it's very interesting how this song was able to live on an entirely different medium, how you just couldn't have predicted in 1994 that it would have been able to carry through, something that wasn't even invented yet. A couple underrated ones that I think could have gotten more pub throughout the years. About a Girl, awesome rendition, On a Plane. Which brings me to another category. Jumping into the Pulling Teeth Award, which is for an underrated, forgotten, or overlooked song. Now, this was inspired off the Green Day track, Pulling Teeth, which was wedged in between Welcome to Paradise and Basket Case, 2 of the biggest songs in Green Day's entire catalog, and it was kind of destined to be forgotten in history. So this is where I highlight a song where I think should be really well known by even fans who aren't necessarily huge Nirvana fanatics. I love the winner for this one, On a Plane. Again, I thought about going with About a Girl, Plateau are very close, but this is the most interesting Nirvana original song during the entire record, I think. And I love the dichotomy of when you listen to it back to back with the rockin' version of the track off Nevermind, and when you compare it to the acoustic song on this record. And it is just really, for me, the hardest one to choose between the best one off the first record, the initial, and then the one off the Unplugged. I think it's the strongest duo of any of the 8 songs Nirvana would perform for this concert. This Ain't Havana Award. Now, this is for the song that blew you away for the first time that you heard it. And this is off of the Ramones track, This Ain't Havana, which was off the End of the Century record, that when I first heard that record all the way through, I just had to immediately take a screenshot of that song and download it to my phone right away. So, listening through it, actually, I remember when I was about in college, listening to this record, Lake of Fire really jumped out, and that's the winner of this award today. As I remember, I added it to playlists that didn't necessarily include a lot of acoustic tracks. They were more of like hard rocking, either if I was adding it to like a playlist that included Led Zeppelin or AC/DC, that this song would still be able to fit in pretty seamlessly. Whereas I feel like if you're listening to a lot of acoustic tracks, you almost want to listen to those in their own separate catalog. But this one fit just so well with how raw and unfiltered it really is, that it fit with some of the most hard rocking songs in my entire playlist. Where Did You Sleep Last Night was also a contender, but when I first listened to this record, Lake of Fire was the one that really jumped out to me. The Highway to Hell Award. Shout out to Angus Young of AC/DC for creating that awesome riff on their last record with Bon Scott. This is for the best musical intro. This one was also a pretty obvious winner for me. Man Who Sold the World, as the lick is the most electrifying of the entire songs on this record, and it just jumps out when you're comparing it to everything else on here. There's some other great intros with Polly, I considered it. Come As You Are, awesome one. Oh Me is a very, very deep intro. But you can't go wrong with the one that's been able to kind of also infiltrate classic rock and alternative rock stations throughout the years. And this is one of the more famous songs off this record, and for a reason. I think the intro really catches you from the start. And it's just so interesting that you can hear those acoustic pedals rip through an almost a hard rocking environment. Jumping to the award that I named after a Nirvana song with the Lithium, best opening line. And that was inspired from the track off Nevermind of Lithium that goes, I'm so happy 'cause today I found my friends, they're in my head. So this one actually shares that record. The winner for this one, Come As You Are, As You Were, As I Wanted You to Be. The openings of course, Come As You Are. Again, there were many contenders for this. All Apologies, I love the intro to All Apologies. Polly's very deep, Something in the Way is very spooky, but I just love the stripped down version of Come As You Are, and it's delivered in such a delicate state that it really makes it pop even more so. And also, there's a fun little tidbit that if you're actually driving into the town of Aberdeen, Washington, where Kurt's from, you will see underneath the sign that it says Come As You Are. And again, there's some hairy history between Kurt and his hometown, as it took a while to, I think, fully embrace his legacy, but now it's clear that every time you drive into the state, you're reminded of the most famous person from there. The Eruption Award for the best musical extended piece off of course, Eddie Van Halen's famous guitar solo from the Van Halen's first record. Now, this was a very interesting category for this record, as a punk band in an acoustic setting is not necessarily the environment for thrashing solos. So I decided to go with the solo for Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam, as we get a bass, an accordion, 2 guitars, and a cello. And I think it drives home the spiritual elements woven not only just into that song, but throughout this entire record. And it's jarring hearing Nirvana play with an accordion. Bottom line. Never would have thought I'd heard that until I heard it on this record. Tattoo or t-shirt. This is something I would take from this record that I would put either permanently on my body or at least for a few hours. And I decided to go with making a t-shirt with the Nirvana smiley logo, or if you're watching, I'm wearing right now. And the line of All Apologies where it goes, all in all is all we are. I'd wear that shirt all the time. Other contenders, I think, for this pick, I love the album cover, which you can also see right here if you're watching this, is the picture that they were able to come up with of the shot of the 5 main people from Nirvana, with including Pat Smear and Lori Goldstein. Up above, it's very powerful seeing all the candles and the flames around with Kurt dead center. Would also be a cool thing for wearing on a shirt or a sweatshirt would be the shot of Kurt smoking the cigarette right after he's done with Penny Royalty. I could see that for sure. So, jumping into the Nobody's Perfect portion, this is where I just do a little bit of nitpicking and just highlight what song is ultimately the one that if I had to get rid of off the record, I would. So I think the 6 covers on this record are just untouchable. I think the 6 ones that they did through with the Meat Puppets, David Bowie, the Vaselines, and Lead Belly are all just phenomenal, and they're part of the Nirvana canon, 100% in my mind. But to me, I was thinking about why that is the case. And I think it helps that I don't really have a relationship to any of those songs from the original. I really was introduced to the Meat Puppets through Nirvana. I was introduced to Lead Belly through Nirvana. I was introduced to the Vaselines through Nirvana. And then the David Bowie song, he even joked in interviews years later that people would come up to him and think like, oh, you did a good job covering that Nirvana original. That almost became their song as well. So I don't really have much to compare it to in a sense of listening to this record with those songs. Now with the other 8 Nirvana songs on this, I do. I compare it to all the time. I find myself just debating what lyrics and vocal chords and what guitar sounds better in Unplugged in the record setting. So I find myself kind of comparing and contrasting more so than I do for the 6 covers. And ultimately, there are a few that I just think are superior from the record on either Nevermind or In Utero. And I think the one that jumps out the most, honestly, for me that I would, if I had to get rid of a song off this record, would be Something in the Way, as you get a pretty good uplift with On a Plane, and then the Meat Puppets then bring it back to the emotional standpoint. And also, this song is probably the closest to the rendition of the song off Nevermind, as they actually had a cello included in that track as well. So as opposed to hearing the cello on Dumb or All Apologies more deeply, if you really wanted to get the same kind of feelings from Something in the Way, I think you can get it pretty much the exact same stretch listening to the one off Nevermind. Not to say I don't like that song. It's very haunting, especially when you're connecting it to the story of this entire record and Nirvana's legacy. But again, for this category, I'll always be honest on the show and highlight the one that I don't necessarily need to have on my playlist. And it would be Something in the Way. I still definitely enjoy it, though. Now, breaking into Almost Famous. This is a category based off the awesome 2000 movie with Kate Hudson. This is a piece that I wrote showing why modern music fans should care about this band and this record. Now, this is titled actually after something Kurt said before deciding to go with Lead Belly for the final piece of Nirvana's Unplugged. This is titled, Fuck You All. This is the last song of the evening. Kurt Cobain lived through just over 9,900 sunrises. He has been gone for over 11,000 days. Yet his music, story, band, and name are still firmly wedged into the culture. And his performance that unforgettable fall night serves as the exclamation point in his band's lasting legacy. With the candles, Lily's lyrical content, and Cobain's expressiveness in the moment, the intense characteristics surrounding the show were obvious. Add in his unfortunate passing less than 6 months after the concert, and this night became a seminal moment in rock history. And that stirring final rendition of Where Did You Sleep Last Night would become the indelible sight and sound of that November evening. The incredible flame burning through Kurt was as evident on his face as it was in his voice. And the visual imagery should not be overlooked. Nirvana did play gigs after Unplugged, but that show rests in eternity as one of their last sets the world was able to take in. And how fitting it was that it was with MTV. The channel, seemingly, played Smells Like Teen Spirit every hour during their sonic rise to stardom. Despite the constant publicity, Nirvana would occasionally let off pot shots directed towards the channel in interviews. But their culmination with music television was Nirvana's conductor releasing that raw energy he had been dying to share. The acronym BC carries different meanings depending on the context. In New England, it's short for Boston College. In a past life, I worked as a lifeguard and swim coach at the BC, which stands for Bay Club. On the periodic table of elements, B and C are next to each other, representing boron and carbon. In religion, it is often credited as before Christ. Rock historians should start labeling the years before 1991, when Nirvana unleashed Nevermind, as BC, before Cobain. In my eyes, he signifies the drastic shift that forever altered the rock genre, and his presence is being felt to this day. Leather to flannel, slick solos to distorted riffs, rock star being a badge of honor to rock star being a scarlet letter. The impact Kurt made on the music industry can be seen in a wide range of artists and genres. Cobain and Nirvana remain a cog in America's youth identity. There is an endless stream of teenagers who were not alive to see the three-man group at their zenith, but many have still heard about them. They might know about their distorted smiley logo, that rappers like Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa speak glowingly of Cobain and his music, that Post Malone played Nirvana songs during a charity live stream in 2020, that the singer is a member of the infamous 27 Club, that they helped launch a fresh aesthetic into mainstream music. And their catalog holds incredible tracks that can be heard everywhere, from Batman movies to TikTok trends. And a critical part of the band's story was how they were able to seamlessly transition from abrasive punk rockers to sincere acoustic musicians for an entire concert. They were not perfect that night, but in a way, that was the point. Nirvana did the entire performance without any second takes, which is rare for an Unplugged show. One reel of tape lasting 56 minutes. No second chances needed. What they were able to capture on the initial effort, they felt, was good enough for the upcoming MTV broadcast. Authenticity was always at the heart of their music. This was one of the most significant shows Nirvana ever conducted, and a key moment in rock history as the setting highlighted many of their seminal qualities. Emotive performances, shining a light on lesser-known songs and artists, and bringing a mixture of levity and darkness to their show. But it is impossible to completely appreciate this record while ignoring the fact it lives on as Nirvana's last album. There's so much baggage now with the Nirvana records that you can't just listen to them as great rock music. Uproxx writer and music critic Stephen Hyden said on the podcast How Long Gone, "You have to get past all the retrospectives and documentaries. You know that Kurt Cobain takes his life, so every song you listen to, you're looking for clues." And while that sentiment is true, to me, Cobain's heartbreaking story does not distract me from their musical prowess. In fact, it adds significance to the band's musical ferocity, fascinating lyrics, and continued impact on the musical and cultural landscape. It makes all of their music, especially their Unplugged set, that much more enthralling. When a talented celebrity dies young, a cognitive dissonance accompanies you while reviewing their archive. When you listen to Kurt Cobain during Nirvana's Unplugged album, observe James Dean in A Rebel Without a Cause, or watch Len Bias's Maryland highlights, two thoughts are competing in your mind. Man, this guy was incredible. It is a damn shame we never got to see all he had to offer. The fact these people are gone does not mean it is impossible to find joy in taking in what they left behind, but it does mean the relationship between their art and life is more interwoven. However, there is a flip side to that coin. In this record, Cobain lives for eternity as a mid-20s firebrand, creating music that would inspire and infatuate countless people for years to come. His talent, mind, and place at the pop culture table were never more apparent than when he takes that dramatic inhale, pierces the camera with those blue eyes, and brings home the rousing end of Where Did You Sleep Last Night? Nirvana's Unplugged album winds through time as a reminder that 1990s America wanted a rock band capable of unleashing raw, intimate components from their arsenal in the appropriate setting. Moreover, the record remains a possible answer to one of the most frustrating and impossible questions in music history. What would Kurt Cobain have tried to do had he not joined the 27 Club? He was interested in collaborating with REM's Michael Stipe. Maybe Kurt would have enjoyed the next stage of his career producing hallowing and introspective acoustic tracks. But the hard truth is, we'll just never know. So, Nirvana's MTV Unplugged in New York will have to serve as a partial thirst quencher to our maddening, never-ending pondering. Nirvana's music, lyrics, and singer's voice are certainly not everyone's cup of pennyroyal tea, but the band's Unplugged album offers a fascinating insight into their musical and emotional range. They could still conjure up a visceral reaction within an audience in a stripped-down environment, which is not the group's main claim to fame. If Nirvana's studio records overwhelm you or turn you off, give this album a try. Not many compilations are capable of being archival favorites for people who adore a band's music and those who cannot stand the group. You don't have to worship at Kurt Cobain's altar to find this album moving. Any type of person is capable of extracting something from this record. This album does not care what ethnicity or gender you are, which musical genre is your favorite, or what generation you hail from. Kurt will still sincerely howl at you and demand for you to tell him, where did you sleep last night? And that does it for this episode, Don't Scratch the Vinyl. So before I sign off, just a few housekeeping items, keep you guys updated. Please follow the show along on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at DSTV Pod. So the initials for the show, Don't Scratch the Vinyl, and then pod short for podcast. The Facebook page is Don't Scratch the Vinyl Podcast. I will be adding additional clips and content to those channels as well, so keep an eye out for that. I have the next episode chosen. It will be Aerosmith's 1975 record, Toys in the Attic. I'm really looking forward to revisiting the Bad Boys from Boston's iconic album. That show will be recorded sometime in the next couple of weeks, and I'm excited that will be the first time, actually, that I'll be celebrating an album that actually had their milestone hit this year, as Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic turned 50 this past April. So, thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you got something out of this show if you were either a longtime Nirvana fan or did not know much about them before listening. Please share along with family, friends. Every little bit helps as I continue to grow and refine this program. I know how much this band's music and story have impacted and continue to impact countless people. And it is not something that I took lightly before coming in to do this episode. I just hope I did their story justice. It means a lot to me. I know it means a lot to other people as well. So thanks again for listening and hanging out with me. I loved rambling about one of the best bands America has ever produced and one of my personal favorites. And please remember, if you take one thing from this show, you rock, and don't let anyone ever tell you different.